It's just after the turn of the 19th century. You're a poor clockmaker's apprentice in a small Jewish community in a small town in southeastern Poland. You've got a hunger for the new learning and the new science, but your circumstances, your poverty, your traditional education, and where you live mean that you've only ever been able to get a small taste of them. But now, an intellectual, a rising member of the country's elite, has discovered your intelligence and your talents, and he's taking you under his wing. He wants you to get stuck into the new learning so that your talents can bloom. And he's going to take you to Warsaw, where you'll meet the leading lights of your country's intellectual elite. That poor clockmaker was a man named Abraham Stern from Hrubieszów. He eventually made his way in the big city and among the Polish elite, becoming a major figure in Poland's Jewish community and a prolific inventor. Stern died on the night of the 2nd of February, 1842. So today, the Stern Foundation is marking his 179th death anniversary as its Patron's Day. Stern was born in Hrubieszów, which is a small town near the current border between Poland and the Ukraine, in 1769. He became a clockmaker's apprentice, and around the turn of the century, he's noticed for his talents and his clear intelligence by the new manager of the estate, a man named Stanisław Staszic. Staszic is himself a major figure in Poland's engagement with the ideas of the Enlightenment. He encourages Stern to learn higher maths, Latin, and German, and then he takes him to Warsaw to expand his horizons. Stern became the first Jewish member of Warsaw's Royal Society for the Friends of Science, which had been founded by his patron. His traditional dress often puzzled visitors and new members who weren't used to having a Jew in a setting like that. He died in 1842, and he was buried at the Brudno Cemetery in Warsaw. It was destroyed by the Germans in the Second World War, but the foundation is hoping that we can erect a new monument to him in the cemetery. Now, Stern is a very typical member of the Haskalah, or Jewish Enlightenment movement. He starts out with a really traditional Jewish education, but his work, of course, puts him in touch with the world of mechanics, of engineering, and practical science. As with many of the masculine, people who followed the Haskalah, it's actually a well-off non-Jewish patron who changes his fortune and changes his life. This is what gets him into the world of maths, into Latin, which he needs to learn science, German, which puts him in touch with a lot of the new scientific discoveries. But it's also the case, at least here, that he's also chosen because he's probably useful for furthering his patrons towards Poland's Jews. And Staszic was, to some degree, hostile towards the Jewish community. Like others of the masculine, it's when Stern moves to the big city that he's able to make the connections that put him in touch with people who are involved in science and in other bits of the new learning. Equally typically, Stern was quite hostile to the Hasidic movement that was emerging at the time. He described Hasids as a band of charlatans who were intending to reinforce ignorance and exploit simple Jews. He, like the rest of the masculine, was convinced that Jews would only progress if they were uplifted through exposure to Enlightenment ideals and to secular learning. Now, where Stern differs from many of the other masculine in Poland and other countries is that he actually gets to work with the government and to influence to some degree their policy towards the Jewish community in Poland. This is largely because his patron, Staszic, was a member of the governing elite. Stern, therefore, gets to write reports for the vice-regal government on religious and social issues in the Jewish community. And he also gets to use his report writing, and does, to try to limit the religious rights of Hasids by trying to have them banned from gathering separately from other Jews. Late in his career, he becomes the rector of Warsaw's Rabbinical College, which allows him to put some of his educational ideas into practice. It's said that after he moved to Warsaw, he only spoke Polish at home, and that he was so proud of being Polish that he refused the Royal Academy of Science in Berlin's invitation to move there to work on developing his most famous invention, which was a mechanical calculator. Now, Stern develops 3 mechanical calculators between the years 1813 and 1817. And why these are important and difficult is that obviously they solve the problem of doing calculations on a large scale. They're difficult to manufacture because you need a complex mechanism in order to carry over digits when you're multiplying and dividing in particular, but also when you're adding and subtracting. And previous makers of mechanical calculators, Leibniz and Pascal were the most famous in the 17th century. There were others that were made in the 18th century, found that you could only calculate up to a certain number of digits before the mechanical process of carrying over digits became too difficult and caused your machines to jam. So enter Stern, who's a clockmaker, who knows about complex mechanisms and gears. And what he says when he presents his mechanical calculator to the Warsaw Society for the Friends of Science is that he's come up with an innovative mechanism. Sadly, his machines don't survive, so we don't know what that mechanism is or whether his machines could work on very large numbers without jamming. What we do know is that his first machine, which he made in 1813, could do the 4 classical operations: adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. The second machine, made in 1817, could calculate square roots. And his third machine, which was the one that he was really proud of, could do all 5 of those operations together, and seems to have been the first one that could do that. Now, because he'd made these machines, he was made a corresponding member of the Warsaw Society for the Friends of Science. This had been founded by his patron, so we can see another link to how one influential individual actually makes a career for one of the masculine. But he doesn't become a full member of this society until 1830. And it's really unclear why, being such a well-known inventor, it should have taken him so long to progress. He also made a number of other inventions: a rangefinder, a mobile topographical table, a more efficient mill, a thresher, a device for keeping horses together in harness, and a harvester. So Stern was what historians of science would call a tinkerer. The kind of inventor who adds to progress not by coming up with a radical new, very big idea, but by making a number of small discoveries and small improvements that improve an idea, a device or process that's already there. And basically, he's one of the people who made things more efficient and easier to deploy, easier to use. And in a way, it's these tinkerers who make the most progress because they're the ones who actually make ideas come to life and make them practical for us to use. In Stern's case, because we don't have a prototype of his machine, we don't know how big it was or what it looked like. But essentially, until the middle of the 19th century, mechanical calculators were all too unwieldy, too expensive, and too big for people to use. So this might explain why his machine didn't get a lot of traction in Poland. It doesn't necessarily explain why he doesn't become more famous abroad. And that might simply be because at the beginning of the 19th century, Poland and Russia are still at the periphery of the scientific networks in Europe. They're not quite so linked in to the center of scientific developments. In any case, we do know that Stern had a disciple named Israel Staffel, who made a couple of mechanical calculating machines. One of them won a prize in Warsaw in 1840, and the other won a prize in London at the Great Exhibition in 1854. But as of now, we don't have any evidence that Stern's machine or Staffel's machine actually led to further machines being made in Poland or abroad, which is a bit of a shame. Despite all this, Stern was a great believer in machines and taking processes away from humans and giving them to mechanical devices. He thought that this was essential for national prosperity, that industry was really the way for a country to develop. And we can see in that he's got an interest not just in developing the Jewish community, but in developing Poland as a nation and using technology to push it higher up towards the first rank of nations. So Stern is really quite a fascinating figure and a really complex one. He's a proud Jew who collaborated with the government to regulate and to control his community. He's a Jewish social reformer who, on the other hand, wages a cultural war against a part of his own community. He's an educator who sought to propagate the most up-to-date ideas that there were in Europe, but also at the same time, frankly, to end the traditional way of Jewish learning. He's a mechanical innovator who clearly wanted to solve some of the most practical problems that people in his era had, but he couldn't get people to use his devices. And he was a Jew who participated in Polish learned and elite society while dressing traditionally and seeking more than anything else to change and to reform and to educate the Jewish community.